Have you ever noticed how Soken's diary doesn't only reveal how Uryu understood the true history of the Quincy race, but also hints at an unresolved consequence tied to the mixed blood he inherited, and how Soken might have repositioned him as a countermeasure prepared against Yhwach? And it is through the diary that Soken's teachings continue to reach Uryu, connecting the knowledge he left behind to the duty of the Quincy of the living world, protecting that world from Yhwach's eventual return. And if you think about it, it makes sense once you consider how the narrative positions Uryu as an exception within his race, the only survivor of the Auswahlen that was meant to strip every mixed-blooded Quincy's power, with the aftermath of that survival still unresolved, resistant to the hollow power poisoning that is fatal to Quincy who lack hollow antibodies, and the one to whom Yhwach bestowed the same shrift as his own, the letter A, which makes you wonder how much did Soken's knowledge shape the anomaly Uryu became. And from the very beginning, Uryu being introduced as the last Quincy is tied to Urahara's explanation of the Quincy eradication from 200 years ago. At first, that title makes him look like the last trace of a race the Shinigami wiped out. But long before the 1,000-year Blood War arc fully recontextualizes that title, the conversation between Ryuken and Uryu before his power is restored already plants the seed. Kubo in that scene highlights the difference between their Quincy powers. Ryuken's power is harder to get rid of, while Uryu's is described as feeble, something that could be lost and restored. So when the arc reveals how Yhwach regained his strength 9 years ago, by taking power from those he deemed impure, targeting the mixed-blood Quincy's of the world of the living through Auswahlen, that conversation starts to read as setup for the two Quincy categories, the Echt, pure blood, and the Gemischt, mixed blood. It layers Uryu's title as the last Quincy not only with the Quincy eradication Urahara explained, but also with the bloodline distinction that would later make his survival the anomaly. And that survival becomes the anomaly once Auswahlen's fatal outcome is revealed. Uryu survived when every other mixed-blood Quincy perished, with still silver forming as a clot in their hearts. So if Auswahlen's consequence is placed in the heart, doesn't that make you wonder if Uryu's heart was affected too, making his survival not just an exception, but the contradiction to what Auswahlen does to those subjected to it? And if you think about it, both Auswahlen and the way a Quincy regains power after losing it to Let's Steal are tied to the same spot, the heart, the place Ryuken targeted to restore Uryu's power, is also the same place where still silver forms. And it is that same place in Uryu that reacts during his fight against Senjumaru, while Yhwach is fighting Ichibe, and just as the 9 years needed for Yhwach to regain his power came to an end, a burst of power activating from Uryu's heart, subtly hinting at a link between Yhwach and his successor. So when Kubo gives Uryu low blood pressure, it starts to read less like a random medical detail and more like another clue placed around his heart, doesn't it? And with Uryu, the heart keeps appearing at the center of these clues, a recurring motif I've explored through visual cues on this channel. But is it just his survival from Auswahlen, or is there more? During the Hueco Mundo arc, Uryu was exposed to hollow power repeatedly, through direct combat with Espada and through injuries that should have been fatal for any Quincy, yet he survived. And doesn't that become significant once you realize that Quincy lack hollow antibodies, making hollow contact poisonous, while Uryu keeps breaking that rule? Katagiri's words revealed the Ishida family had access to proper Quincy treatment, and Kubo visually placed a hollow inflected scar on Izumi's leg, a hint that she got the proper treatment by using Quincy healing techniques. And that treatment is tied back to Soken, whose knowledge is not only tied to what was in the diary, but may also be connected to the way Uryu's body keeps surviving what Quincy bodies should not. And what Soken entrusted Uryu with was not ordinary Quincy training equipment, but the Sanrei glove, an inherited Quincy artifact designed to push a Quincy to their absolute peak, triggering let's still once consider the final Quincy form, releasing immense temporary power at the cost of losing their abilities entirely the moment the glove is removed. And it all ties back to the remaining verse of the Kaiser Gesang. The world in 9 days, the final stage after Yhwach's strength is restored. If the Auswahlen showed Soken that the 9-year stage had already been fulfilled through the deaths of the mixed-blood Quincy's, then doesn't that recontextualize the Sanrei glove itself? Turning what first looked like Uryu's training into the sacrificial tool tied to his role in that war? And Soken's words of entrustment that Uryu will face an unavoidable battle beyond his abilities, a battle where he will have to sacrifice himself by using it, begin to read as a setup for Yhwach's inevitable return, and the war Soken might not live to witness. And doesn't Soken's holy training start to read differently once you remember that Uryu had already been subjected to Auswahlen? Because the Sanrei glove was not ordinary training equipment, but a relic of a lost art that had vanished from Quincy practice over 200 years ago. And Ransotengai was another lost art, one that required such an extreme level of Quincy control, and one Mayuri thought existed only in history books, because after studying thousands of Quincy's, he had never seen even part of it performed. Yet Uryu had mastered it at such a young age, which makes you wonder if Uryu's powers were reduced by what was taken from him. Was Soken only preparing Uryu for a future battle? Or was he also using these same peak-level techniques to push him back toward what Auswahlen may have stripped away? And what sets Soken's passed-down holy training techniques apart from the Vandenreich is that his techniques are relics from a perished Quincy past. Let's Steal requires sacrificing one's own power, and that cost starts to explain why it became obsolete once you connect it to the Quincy eradication around 200 years ago, the same period in which the technique was abandoned. And that cost may be exactly why the remaining Quincy push toward research and evolution, abandoning a fragile technique in favor of one without a sacrificial cost. The next time they faced the Shinigami, the Vollständig, And what makes Kubo's choice of having Uryu use a fragile technique narratively significant is that once you connect it to Soken's warning, it implies no restoration of power lost to Let's Steal, turning the regaining of power into an unresolved clue, one that starts to read differently the moment Auswahlen's process is introduced. The act of taking, restoring, and redistributing power, one that seems to subtly hint that Ryuken's words to Uryu about the restoration process could be recontextualized as specific to Uryu alone, the only survivor. And if you think about his role in the narrative, Kubo giving him the profession of a doctor isn't random. The restoration itself targets the heart with precision of a doctor, 19 millimeters to the right of it. And given his later role, he is also the character able to perform the autopsy, to extract still silver from Katagiri's heart, and forge the still silver arrowhead from the still silver clots formed in the hearts of the fallen mixed blood Quincy's. Then if Uryu's heart condition is an aftermath of Auswahlen, his role as a doctor would be the most fitting to monitor it. And since the hidden room was made out of Reika silver and Reika glass, silver at first seems to read like just another silver-related named Quincy term. But once Auswahlen introduces still silver, the silver surrounding Uryu's restoration can be recontextualized as another subtle hint connecting it to the heart motif, the Ishida family's intervention, and the way their medical and Quincy knowledge keep circling Uryu's unresolved plotline. And by subtly including the Sanrei glove as an illustration in Soken's diary, the anime turns that small detail into build-up for the later reveal of the collapsed chips. And the moment you connect that detail to Soken's words, when he entrusted the Sanrei glove to Uryu, it starts to read as part of a countermeasure. He prepared for the battle Uryu could not avoid. And what makes Uryu's bloodline narratively significant is that as the character who inherits Soken Ishida's bloodline and teachings, he becomes the only one who can activate the collapse chips. With his spiritual pressure, chips made from the Sanrei glove entrusted to him by his grandfather, turning Soken's entrustment into a setup, waiting for its second payoff through the collapsed chips, allowing him to fulfill that self-risking role Soken had prepared for him. So doesn't Soken's diary start to read less like a record of Quincy history, and more like the place where inheritance becomes preparation, also hinting that the aftermath of what Uryu survived as a mixed-blood Quincy, a bloodline he inherited from his mother, may have played a role in the countermeasure prepared against Yhwach's return. Thank you for watching. Do you think stories ever truly end? Or do they always leave us searching? One story at a time, one sip at a time, until next time.